Hi, welcome to the February 8th, 2023 meeting of the CNCF IoT Edge Working Group. On the agenda today, we've got 3 items, and if we have time, members are welcome to add more. First one is just a quick reminder that Kubernetes on the Edge Day is slated for April 19th in Amsterdam, but they are still open for speaking proposals. That deadline is Sunday at midnight, so you've got 4 days to get a submit in for talks. So if you're interested in speaking at a KubeCon event, go for it. In the past, those have ranged from, I think in Los Angeles, we had 600 people register for that event. In Detroit, I think it may have been 200 to 300-ish. So you'll get a pretty good audience. And you might also want to consider attending because this is a fast moving area and there were a lot of good sessions. Next on the agenda, we've got a notice that the Edge Native Principles white paper was got a press reference. I don't know if there's anybody on the call who made it who wants to add a little color to that. If so, jump in right now.
I can add a bit to that. So Brandon Wick has kind of been in charge of getting our first edition of our Edge Native application principles out into the world, and has been working in conjunction with the CNCF media team around that. And so the first wave of this is that they published it in Cube Weekly, which is kind of a weekly newsletter that CNCF stands up every week. And then the marketing committee of the CNCF is going to create a PDF that they'll put in a blog post.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Then third up, we've got, I hope I've got the name right, Eugene Kim of Microsoft will be speaking about AKS Edge Essentials. So I made you a co-host. If you want to share a screen with the group, you should be able to do that now.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me just get this started.
And take as long as you want. There's one other item on the agenda, but if we don't get to it, we can just, I'll shoot out what it's about in chat.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. My name is Eugene. I'm a PM at Microsoft working on both AKS Edge Essentials and Akri, which is a CNCF sandbox project. And I can talk a little more about that later. And then I'm also here with Sean, who is our developer for AKS Edge Essentials. Sean, do you want to give a quick intro?
Hello, everyone. This is Sean. I'm a developer from the AKS Edge Essential teams. Yeah.
Yes, and we also have a couple more team members here to help answer any questions that you guys might have at the end. So yeah, just you can stick them in the chat or raise your hand, whatever is easier. So let's get started. So, as you may know, the cloud is where rapid innovation is happening, right? And on the edge, we have legacy solutions that generate a lot of data, which is chatty. And it's really about sending telemetry to process it in the cloud. But that can get pretty expensive when there's a lot of data involved. So the value of the edge is obviously to do the intelligent process and filtering at the edge. Based on your scenarios so that you can control what actually makes it up to the cloud for cloud processing. And additionally, edge compute creates more flexibility for you. So you can also reduce latency. So according to some data from Grand View Research, we see that we can expect 125 billion connected devices by 2030, 11.2 billion edge computing market size in 2022, and 155.9 billion revenue forecast for edge computing implementation in 2030. And based on our customer discovery and research, modern solutions are now spanning both cloud to the edge. And this enables more developer efficiency because we can have apps run everywhere. And customers would like to, reuse existing Windows or Linux code to get this running, as well as leveraging existing hardware, since buying new hardware can be pretty costly. And so our value proposition is that we can take care of building and managing the infrastructure for users so that they can just focus on the business value and logic. So running Kubernetes in the real world is pretty complex and costly. So first, you need to stitch together multiple open source projects, tools, Kubernetes distributions into a gap-free solution. And keeping your container infrastructure secure also becomes quite difficult and complex, as well as keeping all your things updated at scale. And it can be pretty costly to do all this. So why do we want Kubernetes on the light edge? So here we see a diagram of an industrial scenario. On the bottom corner, we have a compute unit and some factory equipment, domain controllers, etc. Now, if we take these up a level and abstract it, we essentially have an expandable hardware compute cluster, and this acts as the central brain of the factory floor that can talk to the various domain controllers. And our idea is to run Kubernetes on the hardware cluster, and this allows you to scale out your central compute unit and talk to the domain controllers through the open source project Akri, which acts as a connector between your brownfield devices or sensors to your cluster. And at the top, you can run your containerized workloads as Kubernetes pods on your cluster. And now you have kind of like a horizontal scaling orchestration, and you can also scale up or down based on your needs. So what's AKS Edge Essentials? So it's a lightweight platform solution for running containerized applications at scale on light edge devices. And we solve the challenges of commercially deploying Kubernetes at the edge by providing a Microsoft-supported software stack from kernel to the cloud and Windows to Azure, covering your solution from top to bottom. We also deliver CNCF conforming K8s and K3s distributions, and these are managed and automatically updated for you to ensure that your Kubernetes stack is the latest and greatest. And we also support both Linux and Windows containers, which can be deployed on both single or multi-machine clusters. And your deployments across all clusters on the edge or cloud can be easily managed with Azure Arc, so that you can focus your energy on the applications and features that you want to deliver to your customers, not the rigorous work that it takes to manage a Kubernetes infrastructure. So with AKS Edge Essentials, it's pretty easy for you to get started with your on-prem Kubernetes deployment. So you get a Microsoft managed lightweight Kubernetes distribution, which can run on something as little as 4 gigs of memory and 2 virtual CPU compute. And we've also simplified the installation experience via an included Microsoft managed VM for easy installation and configuration. There will also be ongoing monthly security updates from Microsoft to keep your Linux and Windows VMs secured over time. We also provide automatic updates to stay aligned with your cloud Kubernetes version, and you can choose to run Linux, Windows, or both containers when creating a Kubernetes clusters on AKS Edge Essentials. So now let's just look at the overall technology stack, how it works. So at the bottom, you have your light edge devices. And then on top of that, you would run a Windows client host of some sort. We lean on Windows Enterprise. And then you can install AKS Edge Essentials just like any other application through an easy MSI. And so inside you have your PowerShell commandlets and agents that enable the provisioning of your infrastructure, and then your CNCF conformant Kubernetes platform, And then the user can just manage your cluster using either standard kubectl or Azure Arc. And on top of that, you would deploy your Linux and or Windows containerized workloads. This is a bit more of a deeper dive into the architecture. So again, we have your hardware and operating system, and AKS Edge Essentials consists of the Mariner VM and optionally the Windows VM if you want to run Windows workloads. But on the Mariner side, you would have your K8s or K3s control plane. And then any other Azure containers like Flux agents or the Arc connected cluster agents would also sit on the Mariner side. And you can actually have Windows native apps running on the host that can actually talk to the VMs running inside AKS Edge Essentials. So for example, you might have a retail setting with a UI that's a Windows native app that reads telemetry from machine learning workloads running in the Linux side of your cluster on the same device. And this interop piece is what we'd like to see users adopt. And so now Sean's going to talk a little bit about the K3's Windows enablement work that we did. Sean?
Sure. Eugene, can you? Yeah, thank you. This is Sean, and as we engineer AKS Essential, one of our achievements is to bring up K3s for Windows support. As some may know, K3s is a Kubernetes implementation which is optimized for memory and disk footprint. It comes with many interesting architectural decisions to distinguish itself from the upstream KAS. For example, instead of virtualizing the Kubernetes core components as running parts, K3s fold them into one single process and run them in a multi-thread environment. This decision makes both the disk footprint and the memory usage more compact. When it comes to packaging, all of the required runtime binary are packaged in a single binary, and it is executing all of them at runtime when needed. It is also natively supporting to manage pre-cached user container image. It is very useful for the offline deployment. Last but not the least, K3s is engineered in a way to export different functionality by calling K3s space XYZ, which is they call multi-core binary. And as our team started porting, we would like to preserve all of the good feature of K3s as well. This slide shows an illustration how we put things together for Windows port. This effort was not start from the scratch. K3s already made a few skeleton changes to make it ready for someone to continue the cross-platform porting. To highlight a few things we made, for example, we update and pick up the correct set of CNI binary and the container edition for Windows platform. We also update the default Flannel setup handler to support Windows CNI initialization. And we fix a few file path convention issues and update the build scripts to be more like Windows compatible. Eugene, can you move to the next slide? And we hope this effort is not a work only limited to AKS Edge Essential. Therefore, we commit to the community to bring back and upstream those changes back to the K3s project. And to make it more sustainable support for long term, we also commit to work with the project owner to improve the Windows validation. Please stay tuned for our coming activity for K3s. And thank you all. Let me hand over the control back to Eugene.
All right, thank you, Sean. So now I'm just going to show some quick and simple demos using AKS Edge Essentials. And this first one, we're just going to demonstrate like a really simple WASM workload that spits out hello world. So Here I have a config JSON where I can configure the cluster that I want. So I want a Linux node with 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, and 10 gigs of data. So now I will pass in the config JSON as a parameter and do new AKS Edge deployment. And so I'm just going to skip over a little bit. It takes, I'd say, like 2 minutes for the cluster to be deployed. So now our cluster is deployed and I can do kube control, get pause, see all the necessary pods are running. And now we actually have some samples that are public. So this PowerShell script will enable you to run WASM workloads on AKS Edge. So here I'm just running that PowerShell script. It'll download, the shim version that you want and do all the configuring of the files and environment variables for you. And I can drop a link to this sample in the chat after. So now that's done, I'm going to apply the runtime class for both spin and slight. And then I'm also going to deploy some simple workloads to see if it's working properly. So now we're just going to wait for the pods to spin up. And you can see that the spin and slight workloads are up and running. Now I'm just going to get the service of the port so that I can curl it and see that it's working correctly. So you can do invoke AKS Edge command to just do your Linux commands on the node. So here I'm just copying the service IP and port -hello for slight, and there you go, it spits out hello. And you can also do the same for the spin. So just replacing the IP with the spin IP. It says hello world from spin. And then I also have one more quick demo of using AKS Edge Essentials with Akri. So here I'll be demoing discovering OPC UA servers. So I already have, a K3s cluster up and running here. And now I'm just going to update my help charts and use Helm to install Akri with the correct OPC UA configurations. So here I actually already have some container instances running that spit out simulated OPC PLC values. And then I'll actually put in the FQDNs into the URLs so that they can discover the correct server instances. And you can see we have our configuration resource and our Akri pods are running. And if we could just give it some time, it will discover the servers and create an Akri instance resource for each of them. So since I have 2 servers running, we see 2 Akri instances here. And now I'm just going to apply an anomaly detection app, which will use a broker to take in the values from the servers and highlight any outlier values. So I just take the port of the application and the node address. And I'll just put that into my browser. It'll take a couple seconds. And now you see the values are being logged and any outlier values will be highlighted in red. And I can also link to the sample of this as well in the chat. Okay, and that kind of wraps up my presentation. I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
I guess I'll start. Is there a link where somebody could get access to try this out? I assume that try it out would mean get something that you could run on your own hardware to emulate actually doing this at Edge in an on-prem environment.
Yes, we actually have documentation, which I will link here. And, the demos that I showed, I just ran it on my work laptop. So, it's as easy as that to just like try it out on your own. Actually, I will send the correct link.
And in terms of supported platforms, I'm wondering how small this would go. What if you were to put it on an edge device? Is it strictly x86 at this point, or do ARM things like Pi's work? And what would be the memory and number of cores one would expect to run a minimal Kubernetes cluster at an edge location?
Francisco, do you want to maybe help answer that question?
Yeah, I can help with that. So first, regarding architecture, so right now we only support x86, right? But we do plan to support ARM64. That's going to probably come late this year. And in terms of the hardware requirements, right now we need at least a device that had at least 4 GB of physical memory, right? And probably at least 2.5 GB of free memory. And then 2 virtual CPUs with a clock speed at least 1.8 gigahertz. We're working to bring that a bit, down, but that's right now. And then just one more thing there. Disk space, we need at least 14 GB free.
Okay, that's of storage, right?
Yeah, correct.
And I'm wondering how broad this product offering is. Is it strictly Kubernetes, or are there aspects of network connectivity and, say, a container image registry involved with this as a packaged unit for users to consume it?
So do you mean like what's included, right, with the product? Like if it's just the Kubernetes distribution, if there's anything else?
Right.
Well, so right now, right, it's just so that you can add, right? So right now it's Kubernetes, right, both K3s or KDS, and what we already have there also integrated is Arc, right? You're familiar with Arc, right? But it's this kind of Azure service where you can connect, right, and manage your devices and your Kubernetes cluster directly from Azure. And that's already kind of integrated as part of this product. So if you want, it's just an optional thing, right? So if you want to opt in, right, you can go ahead and do that and manage everything through the cloud. But if not, you can just do all kind of on the edge, right, using PowerShell or using whatever other kind of Windows toolings that are there available right now.
Yeah, I'm just imagining a scenario where out at Edge, you sometimes have intermittent connectivity, but you'd still expect to be able to run even with loss of your uplink. And in many things that people put together for edge operation, they would include things like running a local OCI registry so that when apps start or restart, they would pull their images from a local source rather than requiring cloud connectivity. And I'm just wondering if that sort of thing is part of the package or something that you would you'd add on if you needed that facility.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and yeah, we're kind of aware of of these kind of offline scenarios. Right now, we do support offline deployments, so basically you could do that, right, and you could have your private OCI, right, just for your container registry in your private network, and just download everything directly on on-prem, right? We're not providing those sort of products, although because we're kind of, let's call it, CNCF conformant, right, Kubernetes, right, you can just go ahead and do that, right? As long as you're using, OCI container registry, that should work. The other thing is we're working to bring other features that will kind of enable these kind of scenarios, like for example, multiple NICs, right? So that you can have, for example, an online NIC and then having an offline NIC, for example, for a DMC kind of scenarios, right? But yeah, we do support offline deployments. And the other thing is like regarding other features, like for example, updates, right, or management, right? Because this is Windows, right? You can always go ahead and use whatever Windows tooling there is, right, for offline kind of Windows deployments, right? So for example, if you want to apply the updates, right, and you want to do offline updates, right, you can use this. All the AKS updates are done through Microsoft Update, right? So if if you're using whatever WSUS or other Windows mechanisms that are for applying offline Windows updates, then you can use those same update mechanisms, right, for this kind of cluster.
Okay, thanks. You answered my questions. Anybody else who has questions, please jump in.
I got a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh. All right, yeah, sure, thank you. Hi, I actually really enjoyed your demo. Actually, I used to work at AKS, so for a few years, and so like yeah, it feels really like home, Actually, I have a question. So, what's the recommended inter-cluster networking? So I think like between the clusters, like usually you have a lot of like you have to set up some VPN or whatever. Yeah, you have to make the like the subnet, right? Yeah, that's also always a pain point. And the second question is like what's the memory requirement for the Windows K3s nodes? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so first let's go ahead and talk about networking. So we do have two deployment types, right? The first one is what we call the single machine cluster, right? So this is just you have one machine that you can run either you need to run a Linux node and you can add a Windows node that is optional, right? When we do that, right, what we end up doing is we are using an internal virtual switch, and we set up, we create an internal virtual switch for you, and we set up the IPs, right, and the NAT, right, so that you can communicate, with the external network, right, but all is managed through our internal virtual switch, right? The second option is what we call the scalable cluster, right? So as well, you have multiple devices, right, running maybe one or two nodes each of these devices, and they need to communicate between the different nodes in different devices, right? So that there, what we use is we use an external virtual switch, right? So each of these devices, right, will use an external virtual switch, and we'll kind of connect the different VMs, the Linux VM or the Windows VM, to that external virtual switch and communicate directly to the external network. When it comes to more specific kind of networking parameters, like we support static MAC address, we support MTUs, we support proxy, right? And I think the other thing is custom DNS also. So we do support all of kind of networking. VPN is not something that we do support right now, but if you have your VPN right connected directly to the external network, that should work.
So for this external virtual switch, what's the technology there? Are you counting on it running with some kind of open source virtual switch, or in a hypervisor environment that would provide that, or some other thing?
Yeah, so remember, this is running on Windows, right? And we're doing all we're using Hyper-V hypervisor, right? So this is a Hyper-V virtual switch.
Okay.
And then the other question was regarding the memory requirements, right? I'll share here, the system requirements page on the chat, right? But basically, as I was saying, is you need at least a Windows machine that has 4 GB of RAM, right? And at least 2.5 GB free. If you want to do, if you want to have an ARC connected cluster and you want to GitOps, right, with ARC and with Flux, then there's some more memory requirements, and you will need at least an 8 GB machine, right, with at least 4.5 free memory.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is related to the network. So can we still bind the CNI to the workload? Am I right? Any CNI, as long as implementation supports container network interface.
I'll defer. Vincent, are you there? I'll defer to you or Sean, maybe.
I think it's a question about K3S.
Yeah, so for
because you guys use you mentioned K3S, right, as a backend. So
yeah, so for AKS Edge Essential, we provide two distribution to choose. One for the KAS, the default one we recommend to use the Calico, and then for K3S, we use its default implementation, so which is the Flannel. Yeah, so that's the CNI implementation come with the AKS Essential like by default. Well, we don't officially like recommend to for the end user to swap the CNI implementation, and then maybe it's not easy to that because the node itself is the composition is managed by us. Yeah. So back to your question, I would recommend to just go with the default implementation, but for experimental purpose, sure, default, you can try to.
Yeah. So the default is Calico, right?
Yes, for KS, which is Calico. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's part of, if you go, I share there the system requirements there. There's a feature support matrix there, and it will explain, which is experimental, which is probably for each of the different distributions.
Okay. So another thought related to the CNI plugins are the storage plugins. Suppose I wanted to run a stateful app that would use CSI storage. Are any of the plugins supportable, or are there some bundled? In particular, I'm thinking if I wanted to use an NFS mounted storage, there are some Kubernetes distros that run on with some of the minimal Kubernetes don't include the kernel features that would enable that out of the box. So I'm wondering what the situation is there.
Yeah, so we do right now. We support for the Linux node. We support the local path provisioner, right? And we support NFS. Yes, we do have the kernel and the Linux packages needed to do that.
Okay.
When it comes to other kind of, let's call it external provisionings like Longhorn, OpenEVS, like we still haven't tested those, and I think there are some packages missing. But local path and NFS work for Linux, and we're working to port that for the Windows nodes also.
What about the Linux distro? Is there one bundled with use of this, or is it open to the user to provide a Linux of choice to host these nodes?
No, so it's always that Linux VM is always based on CBL Mariner, which is our own Linux distribution inside Microsoft. And the VM it's a bit kind of particular because it has a read-only root file system and has no package manager. So basically, you cannot add packages. It's just like that VM is only used to run these containers, right? And kind of the way kind of one of the reasons we do that, right, is we need to provide a good update story, right? And we provide from kernel, right, from Windows all the way to AKS Edge, we provide that support and that update mechanism. So by providing that kind of no package manager read-only root file system, we can apply these kind of AB updates, right, without issues.
How does a Linux update work in this scenario? Is it managed externally by the AKS control plane that is cloud hosted, or are there extensions to Kubernetes that would do this on a local basis?
Yeah, maybe Sean, Vincent, Can you go a bit into the details there?
Sean, do you want to take this one? I can add later on.
Sorry. So is that a good question? Like how we doing update?
Yes, like suppose I'm a user and I want to either initiate an update or monitor the updates. Where do I go to do that? Is that at some cloud control plane? And
Yeah.
Is it automatic or is this manually driven? Just curious about how these OS at edge node updates would work. Same with Kubernetes updates at the edge node.
Sure. Yeah. So as Eugene mentioned, like in early slide, like the AKS Edge Essential is packaged in the Windows MSI installer. So it will be like installed as a regular application. And in this case, the Windows will regularly check with the Microsoft update. And if there any update, then we will just like download a new update package, which is another MSI, and to deploy to your machine. But at that moment, your cluster still remain the original state. We will not touch your cluster like out of your consent. And the end user, when the end user is comfortable and ready to update the cluster, they can run the PowerShell command line and to confirm is there any update, and if it is, then trigger an update, and the process can be automated if there's some other IT infrastructure. But in general, that's the process how we trigger the update. Yeah.
Okay, so let me repeat what I think I heard, just so I'm sure I understand. So you use something like Microsoft hosts out at the edge, Windows hosts. You would probably use something like Active Directory group policy to configure policies of how the updates would be policed and monitored and downloaded. But they get staged, downloaded, and it's a manual operation that one could use a PowerShell script or API to trigger the actual update. So do I understand that correctly then?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you can combine with other like group policy or under Windows host management solution, which supporting the MSI management. Yeah.
And if I did one of these updates and found I had a bad day, is there a way to roll these back then through the process?
So for now, if the update is going bad somehow during when you like trigger the update, we will doing a rollback. But if it's already finished and you want to go back to N-1, and yeah, that's not something we bake in right now. Yeah.
Well, if it works with the standard Windows update, it's a pretty large hammer. But in theory, maybe you could do a system recovery, but that would recover the entire host, not just this portion, so that if you were running other things there, like I say, it's a pretty crude tool, but it might work. Okay, well, you answered my question. Thanks.
No problem.
I have another question. It's not a question, but I would like to have comments. So you mentioned that you guys use as a backend K3s, right? Hello?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So was there any like other like consideration for like other framework compared to K3s?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
when we
saw
were,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. When we were doing the early research, yeah, there were some other options like on the table, but yeah, at the end, because of the maturity of the KCS, that become one of the one we finally like make a decision to go with for the the memory and disk footprint optimization. Yeah. Does that answer
I
to your
see.
question?
That's the major requirements, right? Memory optimization and
Yeah.
CPU consumption.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think I was considering, I have played with K3S like years ago, and that works okay. And as you mentioned, like of memory footprint and CPU consumption, that pretty well optimized. I can say that, but you know, like something I consider is like architecture. So the K3S is fully compatible with Kubernetes, because the problem could happen because if the application container issues in cluster config API or something relies on the Kubernetes API, and it breaks, right? But because K3S does not support a fully compatible API. So yeah, I was considering that situation, and that's the architecture. So did you have any like consideration about that using
Yeah.
K3S?
So for K3S, for each release, they do pass the Kubernetes conformance testing. So as long as the usage is under the components testing, I think they are all support. Yeah.
Oh,
But
that sounds
yeah,
good.
but maybe you are talking about something else. Yeah, if you are talking something beyond the general conformance test, then yeah, maybe there will be some differences between KS and K3S, and you have to thinking about yeah, which distro you are using, and you need to use the compatible whatever the compatible method to talk to the cluster.
Yeah, Tomoya, I'm kind of curious as to what aspects you think are not compliant, because the CNCF definition requires you to pass a Sonobuoy conformance test in order to even call it a Kubernetes distro. And I think K3S is on the list, but
Oh, okay.
there are often other aspects where they leave things out that people have grown to expect, that are shipped in the box with a lot of other distros, and maybe it's something like that. But could you expand on what aspects you're talking about as having had issues?
Something actually happened to us is like we are trying to use Kubernetes. I don't think that is that supports the conformance test for the Kubernetes, but with Kubernetes, some CNI doesn't work because it depends on the Kubernetes API. That breaks the architecture, right? So I was just thinking, if that could happen with using this framework or something. That's the background.
Okay,
Did I answer your
I
question?
was
Yeah.
just curious.
And thank you, Kate. You just posted that like they support K3S and K8S. Yeah.
Yeah, Kate, when you say they support K8, K8S, is that like Kubernetes just straight out of the box from the open source repo or something else?
Well, I don't think I'm the best to answer this, but yes, when you install, you can choose KDS or K3S, KDS being based on, upstream Kubernetes that they package themselves.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, basically when you install, you have two different MSIs. So one specific for K3S and the other one for KDS, right? And when you install, you'll just choose that. And then for the K3S, it's also, we're using the upstream version of it for the Linux part of the, Rancher K3S, right? And then the Windows, as Sean explained it, we're packaging ourselves that, and we start planning to upstream that also.
Maybe this is kind of new, so you don't have a track record yet to give numbers on this, but I'm curious as to how you do tracking with, if you're dependent on K3S. There's a process where new releases come out of the Kubernetes project itself. And then there's usually some latency between when the Kubernetes pure open source upstream project comes out with a new release, and when the distros come out with the release that have those same features. And then if you're repackaging K8S, I might guess that perhaps there's even more latency. And I wonder if you could give me a feel for, what your tracking performance is, both for coming out with new releases and coming out with patches when CVEs are announced and fixed.
I can try to take that. So as you know, there are a few different AKS products in Microsoft, right? AKS in the cloud, AKS HCI, and now AKS Edge Essential. We try to align our life support cycle for Kubernetes aligned with AKS. So we are going to follow the same life cycle as AKS in the cloud. So that's how, in the long term, that's where we want to align at. And the second question regarding CVE, as Francisco and Eugene mentioned, we are the VM that we use is based on CVE Mariner, and Microsoft has internal tools to check the CVE, and we have an SLA to adjust all the CVE that is published to the NIST database. We are using the same method to track the CVE for key freeze, right? So when the CVE is made available on this, we will patch it within our SLA and deliver the update through Microsoft updates.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else got questions? I see a request in the chat if you could share the slide deck or slide decks if it was multiple
Sure.
speakers who were sharing.
Yeah, let me put it into a PDF and I can post it in the Slack.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, well, if there aren't any further questions, I'd like to thank you. That was a great presentation, and I look forward to going and following some of those links and checking this out for myself. It's inspired me to have a lot of curiosity to go on to try those things.
Thanks for having us. And if you have any questions while you're going through it, feel free to Slack message me or whatever.
Okay. You did demo connectivity using Akri with the OPC UA. Is all of those, is getting into that level of detail in the documentation now so that I could reproduce even that level of interaction?
Yes, you can, yeah.
Okay. And feel free too to let this group know if that if it's getting GA'd. I think often people have a lot of unveiling events and things and kind of hands-on workshops. So if you in the near-term future want to drop links to those kinds of things or YouTube videos or whatever you have into this group's chat stream on Slack, please go for it, because I think a lot of people would be interested in getting that material.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll definitely keep the group updated.
Okay, if there are no other questions, the final item on the agenda today was I wanted to bring up this ongoing work we've had recently, which is compiling a list of open source, what we're calling edge native applications. So I posted in the chat a link to this spreadsheet. Right now we will probably eventually publish this on GitHub, or we've even contemplated talking with the leadership in the CNCF about perhaps getting an edge native landscape going. But we're at early stages of just trying to, phase one was just to figure out what's out there. And it turns out it actually is surprising to me that if you open the link to that spreadsheet, we're now up to 150 open source projects related to Edge. And even that has been culled, where I made an attempt that as I was discovering things, if these open source projects are stagnant, meaning like they've had no contributions for a couple of years, or in some cases, sponsoring foundations have indicated that these things are being retired, those kinds of things are not on that list. So it is really pretty a remarkable testament to how rapidly growing interest is in this edge space that there are so many open source projects. And we'd like some help on that so that if we're missing any of these or some of the data is wrong, please just use your credentials as a member of this group. You'll automatically get edit access to that spreadsheet. Help us continue to polish that and complete it. The next phase, now I think we've already got enough critical mass that what we wanted to do was classify these projects into categories. For example, perhaps the most crowded category there is Kubernetes distributions. You know, we already know that Kubernetes itself, you know, for public cloud, I think has 60 some distributions. But the reality is that users kind of vote with their feet and don't want to use the unpopular ones, and they kind of choose to use one that is getting more attention. And in the edge space, it isn't 60 of them, but I found the number of them out there was surprising. I would expect that as time goes on, people consolidate. Apparently, just like this AKS Edge Essentials chose to align with an existing Kubernetes distro, I think maybe that will happen with others in the future too, that does the world really need 20 different edge Kubernetes distributions? Probably not. And at some point in the future, there will be natural selection going on to where that number gets reduced. And we want to look at this list of edge native applications, divide them into categories so that somebody who needs a tool doesn't have to go manually read 150 entries in a spreadsheet, but maybe can say, I need an AI/ML solution for Edge, or you know, I need an IoT gateway for Edge, and look at what's out there so that you can join in the efforts already being made by others rather than reinventing wheels that don't need to be reinvented. So anyway, that was the agenda item that I had, just to call attention to that this is still ongoing. Please take a look at that. And if you want to contribute your own knowledge, please go in there and help edit that document. That's it for the items on the agenda. Does anybody else in the audience have any last minute adds, remarks, whatever? Just turn on your mic and speak.
Also, just to let everyone know, these agendas flow each time. So if you know someone that would be interested in presenting, or there's a certain topic you'd be interested in hearing about, feel free to let us know or reach out to the person you would like to speak. It's very word of mouth to get speakers to come. So always open to directing the agenda where people are interested.
Yeah. Even if you don't know a speaker, if there's a topic you're curious about, the leadership of this working group is willing to go do a little research to go find who's out there on a topic. So we want to keep this interesting to users. That is the goal. So just kind of things that you want to learn about, go throw them out here. You can either speak up right now or leave a note in our Slack channel suggesting that you would like to see a speaker on this topic, whether you know the name of that speaker or not. Okay, I guess we'll close this out then. The final reminder that I gave at the beginning, speaking proposals are still open for Kubernetes on the Edge in Europe until Sunday. So if you want to talk about something, please consider submitting a CFP. That conference is coming up in April. The Scale conference in Los Angeles is coming up in March and has a lot of Edge related sessions as well. I think that the Linux Foundation announced some CFPs for Open Source Summit in Vancouver that is coming up in the first half of this year as well. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.